An 18-year-old woman went to another city in her car before going missing. The young woman vanished without a trace, and a week later, her body was discovered in a river. The police had no suspects, and her car wasn't located for years. It wasn't until 14 years later that the young woman's family discovered the horrific reality. The small American hamlet of Covington, Tennessee, is where Lisa Kimmel was born on July 18, 1969. Her parents soon welcomed 2 more children, and in 1972, the family relocated to Billings. The girl stood out from a young age for her. She worked part-time at a nearby restaurant and assisted her parents in caring for their younger sisters, demonstrating independence and tenacity. Because of this, she acquired a brand-new Honda CRX before high school graduation. Little Miss, as she was frequently referred to by her parents and sisters, was added to the young woman's license plate, and this plate would play an important part in the overall plot. Despite the opposition of her parents, Lisa chose to continue working at the restaurant after graduating from high school in 1987. The young woman planned to pursue a profession in her chosen field against her parents' concerns. They wanted their daughter to attend college. They ultimately decided Lisa would work for a year and still think about attending college. Soon after graduating, Lisa was presented with a management post, but she was already in another city. The young woman worked at a huge chain restaurant called Arby's alongside her mother, who was the regional manager there. She was expected to relocate to the Denver suburbs, nearly 900 kilometers away from her home, and run a restaurant there. It was a significant assignment for the 18-year-old, who had just graduated from high school, but Lisa embraced it without hesitation. Her mother also visited Denver frequently for work, and they saw each other virtually weekly. The young woman occasionally drove herself to her family's home in Billings. Lisa worked at a restaurant in the city of Aurora. She moved in promptly, rented an apartment, and was generally enthusiastic about her new situation. She met several new friends. She started dating Ed a few months later. He lived 800 miles distant yet frequently traveled to Aurora. On March 25, 1988, a Friday, Lisa was getting ready eagerly for the weekend. For the weekend, she had numerous plans. To finally reveal her boyfriend to her family, she planned to travel to Billings with him. He resided in Cody, Wyoming, close to where she was traveling. Lisa had intended to pick him up and accompany him on their journey. At around 4 o'clock, she left Aurora. After traveling roughly 400 kilometers, she had about 7 hours to drive to the boyfriend's place. Lisa reached Douglas, Wyoming. Apparently, she was rushing since at 9 o'clock at night, a police officer pulled her car up for speeding based on his radar readings. When the police issued Lisa a $120 fine, she was traveling at a speed of roughly 140 kilometers per h. According to state law, she was supposed to pay the money to the officer immediately. The policeman advised Lisa to use the closest ATM close to the road to get the money, since she didn't have that much on her. When they arrived, the terminal did not accept Lisa's credit card. The culprit, who was unable to pay the fee, was detained by the police officer. However, he released Lisa on the condition that she mail the check to the neighborhood police station. It took the young woman roughly 4 hours to get from Douglas to her boyfriend's residence by automobile. She didn't wait for her that evening, and by the time Ed got up at around 7 a.m., he had fallen asleep. Lisa was still missing at the time. He had no means to reach her because there were no cell phones. Instead, he began making calls to the 2 states' police departments. Inquiring as to whether anything had transpired, he provided information regarding Lisa and her vehicle. Despite accepting the information, the police decided not to open a case of a missing person. This was due to Lisa's age, 18, and the fact that too little time had gone since her disappearance. After a few more hours, he continued contacting their mutual friends, but none of them picked up. They were aware of her disappearance. He then attempted to reach Lisa's parents, but they weren't at home. He also contacted Lisa's boss. When they returned hours later, their phone was ringing nonstop. To find out if they had heard from their daughter, other persons made simultaneous attempts to contact them. The parents initially believed Lisa had simply been delayed and was still traveling. It was difficult to believe that anything could have occurred to her, given that she had previously taken this path numerous times. However, time went by and she was still missing. By that time, her parents had called Ed and invited him to visit them. In such disturbing circumstances, Lisa's long-planned first encounter took place without her, and 2 days later, the young woman was still unreachable. The law mandated a 72-hour waiting period before reporting a missing individual. The parents made the decision to begin their own search rather than wait impassively. A small aircraft pilot was contracted by Lisa's father to fly over the area where the young woman was. He hoped this would assist him find where her automobile was supposed to be, but the search was fruitless. Along some of that road, the father also drove his car, but he was unable to spot Lisa. The family continued on after that. The girl's parents called a friend of theirs who was a private investigator and had previously worked for the police. He was able to persuade the neighborhood police agency to accept an early missing person complaint because of his contacts. Sadly, they found no leads, so the police were called right away. Although it was discovered that Lisa had been stopped by their patrol officer the night she vanished, her whereabouts were still unclear. There was just one thing that was certain. Between Douglas and the town of Cody, the young woman and the car had vanished. The area along that path had been searched by the authorities, but there is one major issue. There are hundreds of miles worth of farmland, woods, and mountains involved. To cover the entire area, it required months of labor and thousands of workers. The search on the ground therefore made little or no progress. On the morning of April 2nd, 8 days had gone when a guy dialed the police. He claimed to be river fishing close to Casper, Wyoming. He once recognized the body that was submerged face down in the river. The fisherman immediately assumed it was her since he had just heard on the radio that the police were seeking for a missing young woman. When detectives arrived on the scene, they pulled the body from the water and confirmed that Lisa was indeed the decedent. Medical professionals examined the body and made a dreadful discovery. Lisa passed away just 2 days prior to her body being found, so investigators had to figure out where she had been hiding out for the entire time. It was later confirmed that the young woman passed away about 6 days after going missing. The death was initially believed by the authorities to have happened roughly 5 hours after she vanished, which later caused misunderstanding. Doctors also found multiple stab wounds and contusions on the young woman's body, concluding that she had been abused while still alive. It appears that she had been thrown into the sea from a bridge while she was still aware. Later, when blood was discovered on the bridge, police corroborated this claim. Medical professionals eventually removed biological material from the victim's body, which was discovered to be a sample of male sperm that appeared to belong to the murderer. It was submitted to a lab, but at the time, DNA analysis technologies were quite limited, and the neighborhood lab lacked the tools essential to recover the offender's profile. Detectives came to the conclusion that the murderer was probably a local person who lived close to the river because of the young woman had been thrown from a bridge that was in a wilderness location that was far away, had been abandoned for a while, and required turning off the main road into a country road in order to access. Because of this, the police reasoned that only someone who was familiar with the area could have picked this bridge as a place to dump bodies. The detectives concentrated on finding Lisa's automobile because they thought the murderer had drove it somewhere and that it would contain more clues, but the car was never found. They were unable to locate it since it appeared to have dropped into the ground. In the hopes that someone would have useful information, investigators extensively disseminated information about the case to the general public. A lot of people came forward when the case was widely covered on television, and an odd thing started to happen. The police received over 100 calls in total. People claimed to have spotted Lisa in a Honda CRX with Little Miss license plates. Only these witnesses were from various states, and occasionally even from Canada. The cops believed that appeals were more persuasive. Several days following Lisa's abduction on March 26 and 27, 5 different witnesses asserted to having seen the same car with the license plate, Little Miss being driven by a young woman who remarkably resembled Lisa. The young woman had to go to work on Monday, and she would never have missed it, so it's difficult to believe that she stayed in the Casper region for a few days for whatever reason, and didn't feel the need to call her family.
One eyewitness reported seeing a male. Despite making many inquiries, the police were unable to verify that the man was actually seated in the car with Lisa. 7 photographs of the claimed individuals seen with Lisa were compiled by the investigators, but none of them were useful for the inquiry because the descriptions were too varied to single out any one man. The statements of each witness were investigated by the police. They acknowledged that the murderer may have been behind the wheel of Lisa's automobile, but they could find no logical explanation for how Lisa could have spent the weekend driving about without phoning the perpetrator. Apparently, one of the witnesses saw the killer actually drive Lisa's car to hide it, while the rest of the testimony is either incorrect or outright fraudulent. Parents can call 911 from any nearby payphone. Falls police later discovered that numerous similar automobile types were registered nearby, and it's possible that witnesses saw them while the investigation was going on. Numerous suspects were named by the detectives, but it was later discovered that none of them were connected to the case. Police received a new information 6 months later. Someone had pinned an envelope to Lisa's clothing, a grave with a letter on a man's behalf. It was stated that he regretted Lisa's passing and described it as a devastating loss. Stringfellow Hawk, a figure from a well-known TV show at the time, signed the letter. The note didn't initially appear to be odd, but every member of Lisa's family and circle of friends immediately denied any involvement. In March 1989, exactly 1 year after Lisa's passing, the police consequently reasoned that it might have been left by the killer. Disappearance information about the case was presented on a well-known television program about unsolved crimes. The police received numerous tip-off calls due to the fact that it was watched by millions of people across the nation. Detectives from the area had to put in extra time and manpower to confirm them. The volume of tips and leads that the neighborhood police station received after the episode aired, in the opinion of Lisa's parents, was too much for them to handle. They wanted the FBI to investigate the death of their daughter for this reason, but Sheriff Ron Ketchum was very opposed to the concept and declared that he had no plans to abandon the lawsuit. Nevertheless, a year later, with the backing of higher authorities, Lisa's parents were still able to enlist federal detectives in the case. They got involved in the inquiry and sought to collaborate with the sheriff, but he refused to do so or even answer their calls. The investigators were now able to examine a DNA sample from the victim's body at a federal lab because of the FBI's participation. The sample was matched to that of Lisa's boyfriend, and they didn't match. The detectives decided to be absolutely certain, even though he had never been considered a suspect before. They then made the decision to investigate the patrolman who had stopped Lisa just before she vanished. Although detectives acknowledged that he might have filed Lisa and attacked her later, he possessed a recording of a discussion with the young woman that showed him bidding her farewell. The cop gave his DNA sample right away, and it did not match that of the murderers. After a local radio station broadcast a show about Lisa's murder, the next unexpected tip was received. Were called by a witness who claimed that he had witnessed Sheriff Ron Ketchum stopping the young woman in the road on the day she vanished, and there were some pretty suspicious moments at play. The sheriff opposed the FBI's involvement in the investigation and never claimed to have stopped Lisa that evening. Then, exactly 2 years after Lisa's death, a guy abruptly left the police and made an attempt on his own life. When detectives questioned him, he was able to recover and was receiving psychological treatment. Ron, however, entered a not guilty plea and declined to give a DNA sample. The investigators started to take him seriously as a suspect because everything about him seemed suspicious. But when they were prepared to get a court order for a DNA sample a few months later, the man did offer one himself, and it did not match the killer sample. It's unclear why, if he was unrelated to Lisa's death, the sheriff was behaving in such a peculiar manner. His co-workers noted that he had always been a complex individual who had experienced Vietnam. Thus, before the young woman vanished, he was acting in this manner. The cops eventually ran out of solid leads. They published more information about the case in 1992 in the hopes of locating other witnesses. The primary account of the inquiry suggests that there may have been many offenders. Most likely, one man abducted and killed Lisa, but someone else assisted in getting rid of the car. The possibility of the young woman being abducted at a traffic stop at a petrol station or someplace else was also considered by the investigators, but it was ruled out. Prior to these occurrences, The young woman was very cautious, and Lisa picked her up after his car stalled on the road and another driver stopped to assist her. Because she was aware of the potential danger, the young woman did not step out of the car and merely slightly dropped her window to speak with him. The case remained unsolved for an additional 10 years because the authorities were unable to pursue any fresh leads. They didn't experience their long-awaited breakthrough until July 2002. The neighborhood's police force reopened the killer's DNA sample was the first thing entered into the FBI database during the inquiry. It wasn't used en masse across the nation until the late 1980s, and even then, it wasn't around yet. When they finally added a sample from Lisa's body, detectives discovered a match right away. The sample belonged to Dale Wayne Eaton, 59, who was incarcerated at the time. In 1997, he had been detained for using a weapon against a young couple and their young child when they were traveling through Wyoming. Wilderness. Dale drove by and stopped to assist as their car stalled. We offered the family a ride to the closest service station, which allegedly belonged to his brother, after he examined the car and indicated there was no way to fix it immediately. After agreeing, they boarded his van. Dale declared he was exhausted and needed to sleep a short distance later. He climbed into the rear of the vehicle and asked the woman to take the wheel. He grabbed his rifle and motioned for the woman to get out of the car and onto a country road as soon as it moved. Woman violently twisted the wheel, knocking Dale off balance and causing him to drop his weapon. When they exited the vehicle, the assailant reached for a knife, but the family's father quickly reached for the rifle and struck Dale with the buttstock. After that, the family climbed into his van and headed to the neighborhood police station. Dale was apprehended by detectives after they drove to the spot and found him nearby. Due to the numerous mental impairments that were discovered during his trial, they decided to put him to a closed rehabilitation center rather than imprison him. According to the authorities, he would stay there for a number of years during which he would receive assistance in moving on with his life, finding a job, and other things. After a few months, he managed to escape, for which reason he was apprehended and given a 5-year prison sentence. What matters most in this situation is that Dale's DNA was collected before he was imprisoned and submitted into the FBI database. This led to the Lisa case's investigators ultimately finding a match. He lived nearby and was 43 years old when Lisa was killed. Law enforcement investigated Dale's past in that area and found a long list of crimes he had committed. At the age of 16, he committed his first significant crime. Dale offered to help the woman take the watermelons he had just sold her home. The woman looked at the watermelons after they arrived and noticed they were rotten. After a lengthy altercation in which she refused to pay for them, Dale stabbed her and then ran away. The following day, the man was taken into custody, and the court ordered him to receive treatment. He was identified as having many moderate mental illnesses. Following treatment, he kept switching employment since he couldn't establish himself in any position. He eventually got married, and the two went on to have 3 kids. The couple's 15-year marriage was miserable. They fought frequently and separated. He relocated to Moneta, a city only an hour's drive from Casper, in 1996. There, his in-laws had a bus converted into dwelling and numerous unfinished constructions on the property. Dale made himself at home there. Except for an occasional tiny bed, there were no living quarters in that bus. To take a shower, he would travel to a neighbor's home. Because of this, Lisa's body had DNA from a seasoned serial offender, but authorities weren't ready to arrest him because they needed more proof. Officers showed up to the precinct where he formerly resided. Nearby, a number of neighbors lived, and one of them gave the detectives an intriguing tale. Around the time Lisa vanished, Dale allegedly dug a sizable hole on his property and declared he was going to put, but that never happened, in a septic tank. When the lot was dug up, the detectives discovered Lisa's automobile with Little Miss license plates. With all of this information in hand, the police began to work gathering the evidence they would need to successfully prosecute Dale. They knew they would have plenty of time while he was inside because Dale killed the man who shared his cell with him. He was finally charged with Lisa Kimmel's murder in April 2003. The lawsuit proceeded because the man refused to admit guilt, The prosecution called Dale's other cellmate to testify, saying that the man confessed to him about Lisa's murder and gave him all the details the young woman allegedly saw him on the side of the road, stopped, and agreed to give him a ride. At one point, Dale allegedly started to molest her but was rejected. Then he pulled a gun and ordered her to his house where Lisa was killed. But nobody accepted this explanation. Lisa's parents warned her against picking up a hitchhiker in the middle of the night in a remote location. Dale had a motive to lie. Either he told his cellmate a lie, or he made it up himself to get his sentence reduced for testifying. The investigation reveals that was not the case. Lisa most likely stopped at a petrol station before Dale attacked her there. Between Casper and Dale's house, they even mentioned a certain gas station by name. Lisa had to pass it on her way there. Cody Dale probably got into her car and used a revolver to compel her to drive to some isolated spot because he frequently drove there to use the public lavatory. Then, he brought her back to his station and held her in the bus because he had no water on the site. He took her to that bridge a few days later, stabbed her multiple times, and then threw her into the sea after deciding to get rid of her. Additionally, experts compared Dale's handwriting to that of the note placed on Lisa's grave. They discovered a lot of similarities, but despite the difficulty of calling it evidence in court, Dale was found guilty thanks to DNA evidence found on the body and the car that were both on his property. Even the lawyers were aware of this and made an effort to have their client not receive the death penalty rather than an entire acquittal. They cited the mental disorders that prevented him from accepting full accountability for his deeds, but in vain. Dale was given the death penalty when the jury found him guilty. Then Lisa's parents sued him in a civil case, which was approved by the young woman's parents, along with the fire department, destroyed all of the buildings on the land where they were located, after the court ordered that Dale be removed from it. Since Lisa's conviction, this occurred on her birthday. In 2010, the court accepted the appeal and scheduled a fresh hearing despite Dale's attorney's repeated attempts to have the death penalty revoked. The appeal was approved on the grounds that the court erred in imposing the penalty. In addition, the evidence of Dale's cellmate was seized upon by the defense team to take into account the offender's significant childhood mental disorders and developmental deficiencies. Although the man's testimony may have been made up and the jury was not informed that he had been promised a lighter sentence as a result, there is still little chance of the sentence being completely overturned. The death penalty is unlikely because Dale is still incarcerated and is currently 78 years old. In this entire narrative, there is one more point worth highlighting. In the neighborhood where Dale lived, there have been a number of unsolved homicides and mysterious disappearances of young women. Despite the lack of available proof, the police acknowledge that Dale could have been the murderer. His entire life shows a definite propensity towards crimes in Syria. This suggests that Lisa Kimmel wasn't his only victim. Share your opinion on this story in the comments and don't forget to like it. Thanks for watching.
An 18-year-old student visited her family for the holidays, but a few days later, she vanished without a trace. The police got involved after her mother started receiving strange messages. None of them were ready for the truth they learned during the investigation, which truly shocked the entire family. On August 9, 1996, a Norfolk, Virginia suburb welcomed Angelica Hadsell into the world. She soon gave birth to 2 younger sisters, but when her parents got divorced in 2005, the girls stayed with their mother. Angelica had 3 younger sisters, who she got along well with after her mother remarried in 2010. They had another daughter. In Farmville, Virginia, about 3 hours away, Longwood University accepted Angelica after she graduated from a nearby high school. In addition to joining 2 sports teams, she also had a year-early graduation goal and had to work quickly to meet it. She continued to travel to Norfolk to see her sisters and parents on a regular basis, despite this. When Angelica was 18 years old, she visited her family in March 2015 with the intention of staying for a few days during her spring break. Angelica was delighted to be able to return to her family, was in a good mood, and enjoyed spending time with them. She got her 3 younger daughters ready for school the next morning, March 2nd, and then left to go to work. leaving Angelica at home by herself. But when her mother came home from work in the afternoon, Angelica was gone. The back door was open, music was playing, and only a few of her belongings were put into the washer, giving the impression that she had left quickly. This puzzled her mother because she and her daughter were always in contact, and she expected Angelica to let her know if she was going somewhere. However, on this particular day, Angelica didn't answer her phone, so her mother wrote to her and inquired as to where she had gone. When asked where she had gone on her walk with friends, Angelica replied that she had gone for one, but she didn't say specifically where. They then messaged back and forth about when Angelica planned to come home, and this time her mother noticed something odd once more. She claimed that the messages from her daughter were written in a very distinctive manner compared to how she was used to. Normally, Angelica would send her detailed messages with all the pertinent information, but this time she only got brief, ambiguous messages. Despite this, the young woman's mother did not have any unfavorable suspicions because she believed that the young woman simply wanted to hang out with her friends and that she was already 18 years old. Angelica didn't return home on that day, but she answered her messages anyway. She continued to evade questions about her location and her intended return time for the remainder of the day, though without providing any clear answers. Eventually, the daughter stopped responding to her mother. She then made the decision to contact Angelica's friends, but was disappointed to learn that no one had seen her and had any idea of where she was. The mother contacted police detectives that evening on March 3rd, after making the decision to do so. The young woman appeared to have left of her own free will at first. A note found in the house soon provided evidence in support of this version. It was probably written in Angelica's handwriting, according to Angelica's mother. One sentence is all there is. Angelica wrote that she needed some alone time with herself because of everything going on in a very strangely worded note. Her family could not comprehend what she was trying to say. She was a happy young lady who studied all her spare time and planned her future. She never made any significant life announcements, so the note seemed pointless. The fact that Angelica left her clothes, wallet, and car at home was also discovered by the police, which already refuted the claim that she left on her own initiative. There was, however, nothing to suggest the opposite at the time. A piece of Angelica's credit card was discovered nearby by Cody, a neighbor who lived close to Angelica's family, several days after the investigation began. He told the police about it, and that's when he was named as the prime suspect. He was questioned by detectives for 12 hours because they believed he might be connected to her disappearance. The police did not immediately drop their suspicions despite his denial of guilt. Additionally, according to Angelica's family members, by that point everyone in the neighborhood was aware of the case, and many people were attempting to aid the investigation. Teams were formed to scour the area for any proof, and everyone started to suspect Cody. After the credit card incident, it was discovered that he and Angelica went to the same university and dated for a while. Soon after, something else happened that seemed to link him to her disappearance. The situation changed quite strangely less than a week after the investigation started, when Wesley Hadsall, Angelica's stepfather, stormed into Cody's home and discovered Angelica's jacket there. Wesley, who was helping her friends find his daughter while they were searching for her, instructed them to go to Cody's house and search there for Angelica's belongings because he thought the boy was responsible for her disappearance. The friends went to Cody's house and did exactly that. They discovered her jacket there and immediately informed the police. Again being questioned, Cody was under tremendous pressure. Despite this, Cody claimed he had no idea where the investigators were, extremely perplexed. The detectives had a strong feeling that the boy was telling the truth during the interview, despite the fact that the jacket and Cody's home were both very important pieces of evidence. The most crucial thing he did was offer an alibi for the day of Angelica's disappearance, in addition to voluntarily giving his DNA sample, taking a polygraph test, and agreeing to anything else they asked of him. He may actually be innocent, the police concluded after investigating this information. Wesley, Angelica's stepfather, gave them the tip. They told Angelica's friends, who had found the jacket. With this knowledge, the detectives acknowledged that the man might have planted the jacket. The key question was, why would he do that? Wesley's involvement in his daughter's disappearance was the most likely explanation. When the police started looking into his background, they discovered that he had been charged with and found guilty of more than 10 offenses, all of varying degrees of seriousness. He was frequently detained for robbery, drug use, and possession. In 2005, he abducted his own wife and brutally treated her for a number of days. In any case, the court was unable to establish his guilt, so he was spared any significant penalties. Throughout his life, he had spent a number of times and years in prison. The investigators also learned that Wesley's mother had expelled him from the home a few weeks prior to Angelica's disappearance because he had begun abusing strong, illegal substances. He'd been staying in hotels ever since. He was a serious suspect in light of everything that had happened. When asked when he last saw Angelica during the interrogation, the man insisted that he had nothing to do with her disappearance and that he was actively looking for her. Around noon on the day of her disappearance, Wesley claimed to have seen her at a gas station. The detectives looked over the video from the gas station cameras and couldn't find any evidence to back up the young woman's request for a few $100s before they split up. Wesley's co-workers at work said he had taken a few hours off that day because his daughter had asked him for money. Around 2 p.m., he went back to work, nervous as ever. In his statement, there was a clear inconsistency. Wesley claimed to his co-workers that he had to leave because his daughter had requested money, but he admitted to the police that he had unintentionally seen Angelica at the gas station while driving by. There was no reason for Angelica to be at the gas station. Her car was parked close to her house. Wesley explained that the alarm had gone off at the home where he had been living prior to the argument with his wife when asked why he had left work that day. He also mentioned that he had received a notification on his phone. This information was not corroborated by the police, and it did not account for the blatant inconsistencies in his statement. In order to search Wesley's motel room, where he had been residing for the previous few weeks, the police next obtained a warrant. Interestingly, they discovered, because of his numerous convictions, Wesley had been maintaining a large number of guns and bullets. He was arrested right away because it was illegal for him to possess weapons. Wesley was accused of 3 crimes: illegal possession of a weapon, breaking into Cody's house, and tampering with evidence because of the jacket he allegedly planted in his room, even though there was no evidence pertaining to Angelica there. He continued to maintain that he was doing everything in his power to locate his daughter, despite having no involvement in her disappearance. As a result, the court gave him a 20-year prison term, and the detectives kept looking for the young lady. The most intriguing thing they found when they seized Wesley's work vehicle was the GPS navigator, which they sent for analysis to specialists. They also discovered shovel tape and dark gloves inside. According to the information they had on March 4th, the detectives were interested in learning where Wesley had gone in the days following Angelica's disappearance. Wesley left Norfolk and traveled 90 kilometers to a nearby town. He then returned to his job after parking his car somewhere for 20 minutes. On April 9th, the detective arrived at the scene and found his car parked in a remote area close to an abandoned house. They finally located Angelica's body in a nearby ditch after searching the area. Even though she was protected by a piece of plywood, it would have been extremely challenging to stumble upon her because the area around the house was overgrown and inaccessible. As a result, no one could have done so. An unexpected statement was waiting for everyone after the body was sent for a medical examination. Participants discovered a level of illegal substances in the young woman's blood that was 3 times the amount that would have been fatal for a typical person, according to the results of the process. The shocked members of Angelica's family. The young lady was involved in sports, almost exclusively studied, and didn't even drink alcohol. She was not taking any illegal drugs, which no one could believe. A second round of tests was chosen by medical professionals. It is possible to tell if someone has used narcotic drugs in the past by looking at their hair, and this analysis revealed that Angelica had never had any experience with illegal drugs. Because of this, It was virtually impossible to believe that she would suddenly decide to take a triple dose of medication. A piece of plywood was also placed over her body after it had been buried in the ditch. Everything pointed to the possibility that these drugs were administered to the young woman against her will, with the intention of killing her while making it appear as though it was an accident. Wesley was interrogated by the detectives once more. When Angelica's body was discovered, the first thing they asked the man who was already in prison at the time was what his work car was doing nearby. The man's explanation, to put it mildly, was implausible. He claimed that he might have been set up and that he didn't go there on his own. He had additionally stated earlier that only he had access to this vehicle. Wesley even suggested that someone might have stolen his car's navigation system, driven to that residence, and then returned the device while the police gathered evidence. They were able to locate several recordings that demonstrated Wesley was in the city where his daughter's body was discovered on the same day, driving his work car from a number of street cameras situated along the route to this house. Even though everything pointed to the man being involved in the murder, the court still required additional proof, so the police worked on this case for several more years in an effort to gather indisputable evidence. Wesley was only charged with Angelica's murder at the end of the investigation because of this. According to the prosecution's account of events, the primary court hearing started in January 2022. Wesley went to the house on March 2nd, where Angelica was staying with the sole intent of robbing her and using her as a pawn in other violent crimes. He had planned to make it look like an accident, but instead, he took her out of the house, carried out his plan, and gave her a triple dose of drugs. The man had carefully thought out his plan. The police discovered repeatedly during countless interrogations his denials and made every effort to discredit himself. The prosecution was successful in locating a witness who corroborated their story. This witness sold Wesley the same illegal substances that killed Angelica. Additionally, the court heard that the location information from Leslie's phone and Angelica's phone were compared after the police discovered Angelica's phone on the street. Her phone had been next to Wesley's since the young woman vanished, even when messages were sent from her mother's account. It was clear from this that Wesley had taken Angelica's phone and was attempting to reassure Angelica's mother that everything was fine, insisting that their client was innocent. The defendant's attorneys, they said Wesley had nothing to do with it, that the girl was depressed and had decided to take her own life. This account omitted any information regarding who buried her and covered her with a piece of plywood, or why his car was found close to the location where her body was discovered. All of these defenses attempted to account for either coincidences or attempts to frame Wesley. Interestingly, despite having previously stated numerous times that he did not accept the overdose theory and thought Angelica was murdered, the man's opinion changed in court for an unknown reason, and the jury arrived at a decision in less than an hour. Wesley was convicted of murder and given a life sentence. The man stated that he would contest the judgment, and theoretically, he stands a good enough chance of succeeding in having the judgment reversed. As you might have guessed, there isn't a single physical piece of evidence against him. For instance, DNA evidence of his guilt would have been virtually unassailable if it had been discovered on the victim's body. Wesley's work vehicle was actually found close to the location where the young woman's body was later discovered, which is the main defense argument. The fact that this person abducted and violently treated his wife 10 years prior to the incident raises doubts about any of his other arguments, though none of them are particularly strong proof. Does the defense have any stronger evidence, or does the prosecution's version seem to be more convincing? Might very well succeed in getting a new hearing by contesting this decision. Your thoughts? Wesley is allegedly responsible for the murder, or is he unrelated? Share your opinion on this story in the comments and don't forget to like it. Thanks for watching.
In this video, we'll discuss crimes perpetrated between 1996 and 2014. Despite the wide time span, all of these crimes had one thing in common. They were all committed along Virginia's Route 29, a major thoroughfare. The police looking into these crimes made several attempts, some of which were successful, to connect the incidents in some way. Some of the criminals referenced in this video may have already come up in separate investigations, though. Here, we'll try to look at the events from the standpoint of several offenses. In 1996, more than 20 women went to the police and said they had all been chased by a man in a pickup truck on Virginia's Route 29. He would communicate an issue with their automobiles and flash his headlights. A white male between the ages of 35 and 45 with reddish-brown hair who was driving a pickup vehicle was characterized as this individual. He earned the moniker Route 29 Stalker, 25-year-old Alicia Reynolds. Alicia Reynolds said her husband Mark farewell on March 2, 1996, at 7:30 in the morning in Baltimore, Maryland, and left for Charlottesville, Virginia. She had a meeting with her mother scheduled for 10:30 a.m., but she had nearly 150 miles to travel. She held off till 11:30 a.m. Alicia's mother contacted her husband Mark, but did not hear from her daughter. Mark informed her that Alicia had departed 4 hours prior, and that by that time, even without rushing, she should have arrived. After making the decision to call the police, Alicia's car was eventually discovered at 6 p.m. on the side of Route 29. Despite being close to Culpeper, Alicia was nowhere to be found. When the car was inspected, there were no indications of a crime, and afterwards, specialists said the car was mechanically fine. What caused the young woman to leave her automobile unattended is unknown. An inquiry was launched. Soon, witnesses who had observed Alicia conversing with a man in a blue pickup truck on the side of the road were located. The alleged first victim of the stalker on Route 29 is Alicia Reynolds. All the women who had been pursued by the man in the pickup truck before she vanished and who hadn't previously recognized they were in danger came forward to the police and related their interactions with the unidentified pursuer after she vanished. It was discovered that 3 other ladies had previously dated in addition to Alicia. 2 of them were delivered to their destinations in the pickup truck, but the third woman, Carmelita Shomo, was not. Sadly, no picture of her could be located. A week before Alicia vanished, Carmelita stopped at his request. She saw someone flashing their headlights at her in the rearview mirror as she was traveling home from work on Route 29 that wet night. She stopped, and the pickup truck's driver followed suit. She was said there were sparks as the man approached her after getting out of his car. He then offered to give her a ride home, and she consented, telling him that it was coming from underneath her car while she was driving, and that it might be unsafe to keep using it. The pickup truck stopped on the side of the road after a brief trip, and the woman was then attacked. Despite having a fractured ankle, she was able to get out of the pickup truck and draw the attention of oncoming traffic, which startled the driver and caused him to speed away. However, Carmelita, an immigrant with poor English language, reported the event to the police. At that moment, no steps were done to identify the pickup truck driver due to the police officer's dismissive attitude and lack of respect for her word. Despite the efforts of law enforcement, the police were unaware that their incompetence would eventually result in a tragedy for the Reynolds family. 2 months after going missing, Alicia was not located. Her body was located 15 miles from where her car was found, in a forested location. Laura Winans is 26 years old, and Julianne Williams is 24. May 1996, the same month that Alicia Reynolds' remains were found again, saw the father of Julianne Williams call the police on May 31st to report his daughter missing. She hadn't arrived at the appointed time since she and Laura Winans were on vacation in Shenandoah National Park. They were last seen extending their stay at the campground on May 24th at around 5:30 p.m. Following the police report, park rangers found the 2 women's bodies the following day. They were both killed by incisions to their necks and the binding of their wrists. Authorities gave May 28th plus or minus 30 hours as the date of death. It was discovered that there had been no sexual activity before the victims' deaths, and their possessions were still in their tent. We shall return to this incident later. This motiveless crime baffled detectives, and the authorities were unable to crack the case right away. Sophia Silva, 16, is a teenager. On September 9, 1996, 3 months later, 16-year-old Sophia Silva vanished from her yard in Spotsylvania County, without leaving any evidence of a struggle. Numerous searches. Sadly, It didn't produce any results.
Her remains was discovered in a King George County creek a month later. The test found that Carolyn McDaniel was 20 years old and that Sophia Silva had also experienced sexual assault before to her death. 20-year-old Anne Carolyn McDaniel left her home in Orange and vanished 12 days after Sophia Silva was kidnapped. Occasionally, hitchhiking was something Carolyn McDaniel enjoyed doing. She was last saw hitchhiking on the road on September 20th, 1996. Her burned bones were discovered 2 days later, located in Culpeper County, only 15 miles from the location of Alicia Reynolds' body. Katie Lisk was 12 years old, and Kristen Lisk was 15. Despite the police's best efforts, 7 months had gone since Anne Carolyn McDaniel's death was discovered, and none of these crimes had any solid suspects. In the meantime, Spotsylvania, where Sophia Silva was kidnapped on May 1, 1997, was shaken by a fresh incident. Kristen Liske, 15, and her sister Katie, 12, went missing. The girls would typically contact their father when they got home from school because he was at work at the time. On this particular day, though, the father didn't hear from his girls, so he began making calls home. He went home right away because there was no response. None of the nearby residents had seen the girls, and they were nowhere to be found. The girls had come back, as shown by the bag with their school books that had been placed on the grass. But something had transpired since I got there. In the wake of it, a police report was made, and some 1,500 people joined the hunt for the girls. Their bodies were found in the South River, 40 miles from their house, 5 days later. The test revealed that drowning was the cause of death. Strangely, the water discovered in their lungs was probably clear tap water, much like in Sophia Silva's case. In their last moments, the girls' sexual integrity had been compromised. The types of crimes and some supporting evidence shown that a single person was responsible for these crimes. A Canadian visitor was riding in Shenandoah National Park on July 9, 1997, when she heard the sound of an approaching automobile. She was expecting the car to drive past, but it didn't. She noticed that the car was approaching her in an odd manner. The pickup truck's driver tossed a soda can at her before getting out and ordering her to take off her clothes. The woman tossed a water bottle at him and used her hands to block his path as he approached her. He tried to drag her into the car, using the bicycle as a barrier, but when he realized he couldn't, he got back in the driver's seat and tried to run her over. Being discouraged by yet another failure, she managed to hide behind a downed tree. The woman saw it as hell when a ranger just so happened to be walking by. He immediately radioed a description of the vehicle, a blue Chevrolet truck, and the person who was arrested as they were leaving the park. The culprit was identified as a 28-year-old man. On April 10, 2002, Daryl David Rice received his sentence of 11 years and 3 months in jail after pleading guilty to the attack in March 1999. In relation to the instances of Laura Winans and Julian Williams, Rice was charged. To refresh your memory, the young women's deaths were reportedly expected to occur around May 28, give or take 30 hours. It was discovered that Rice entered the park at around 8 o'clock in the evening by reviewing surveillance camera footage from that time. Dated May 25th. He returned to the park the following day at 5 p.m. and was seen on camera visiting the park on June 1, 1996, the day the young women's bodies were discovered. Rice knew he would likely receive the death penalty, so he hired a strong defense team that eventually had the accusations against him withdrawn. A hair discovered on the sticky tape used to bind the young woman was later determined through new DNA testing technologies to not belong to Rice. He was cleared of those charges in April 2004 due to insufficient evidence. But Rice's legal struggles were far from ended. The blue pickup truck he was driving when he was stopped belonged to his father, who resided close to Highway 29 in Virginia and was accused of being the Route 29 stalker. His attorney expertly handled the problem once more. When Rice was named as the attacker during the 2005 trial, Carmeliere Shomo, the woman who had successfully resisted the attack and broken her ankle in the process, pointed to a completely different person when she was shown photographs of men for identification prior to the trial. Years ago, in the middle of the night, the defense was able to sow a seed of doubt in her mind, making her wonder if Rice was the criminal. The defense team successfully exploited this uncertainty, which led to the charges being dropped. Additionally, there was no evidence linking Rice's actions to the Alicia Reynolds case, which is regarded as an incident involving the Route 29 stalker. Cases of harassment on the highway were only seized following Reynolds' disappearance. Additionally, nothing suggested Rice's involvement in the incidents in question, Spotsylvania and Orange. Despite numerous circumstantial evidence that the Route 29 stalker was in fact him, it was impossible to prove. As a result, the identity of the driver of the pickup truck that scared women is still unknown. Even with the given prize, the police made a concerted effort to solve these crimes, but they were unable to come any closer to the offender. 15-year-old Carol Robinson was at her friend's house on June 24, 2002, in Columbia, South Carolina, while an acquaintance showered. When a man with some pamphlets in his hands approached, Kara was watering the flowers in front of the house. He requested that Kara give her parents the items. He held a gun to her neck as she walked up to him and told her to get in his car. When he brought Kara to his house, she was chained and repeatedly forced to have sex while the kidnapper was fast asleep. Kara was able to free herself, make her way outside, and eventually find a police station. She had been held captive at the station for 18 hours. Everything she recollected helped the police find her abductor, but by that point, he had managed to escape. The perpetrator was identified as Richard Mark, 38, an honorable man who appeared to be just like everyone else. Mark is a former member of the military who is married and works. He had left the Navy in 1987 after being exposed to a 15-year-old girl and her 3-year-old sister, it was learned. For this offense, he was given a 3-year sentence with probation. He was captured by the police in Sarasota. Ivana made the decision to commit suicide after realizing he had no other option and was marked by a gunshot and a burst of light. It was determined that he was involved in the cases of Sophia Silva, Kristen, and Katie Lisk, after inspecting his home and comparing the available evidence. The threads on the corpses of the ladies were an exact match to the strands on his bathroom carpeting. It's unbelievable, but forensic specialists were able to locate Kristen Lisk's fingerprints in the car's trunk 5 years after the crime. DNA testing. By examining the facts, it was finally determined who killed Sophia Silva Kristen and Katie Lisk, and it was also shown that his early life had a big impact on who he would become. When Mark was 6 years old, his father Joseph was giving him a bath, and water went into his eyes, causing him to scream. Mark's father Joseph was an alcoholic, and his mother was openly having affairs with other men. Joseph was enraged by this, and the child at the time claimed that his father intended to drown him. Family members claimed that Joseph also drowned, leaving their dog's Mark right in front of him. The pattern of his subsequent crimes is thought to have been influenced by this event, drowning his prey. Additionally, he was looked into for possible connections to the incidents on Route 29 and the Alicia Reynolds case, but none were found. Reports of the Route 29 stalker ended once the witnesses were dead, and Rice was incarcerated serving his sentence. But soon after, girls started reporting it again. Started vanishing once more in Virginia in 2005. An unidentified 26-year-old woman from Fairfax, Virginia, was being carried into a wooded area after being attacked from behind on Rock Garden Drive, while she was returning home on foot from a nearby store. Dark and poorly populated, it was already. She fought back vehemently and shouted, but the attacker eventually overwhelmed her around 10 p.m. He coerced her into a sexual act before starting to choke her. Thankfully, a bystander who was nearby heard the woman's cries and ran to help. The attacker made it away, and the police were able to collect a sample of his DNA. They also produced a composite sketch, but they were unable to capture him using this information right away. On October 10, 2009, Cassandra Morton, at age 23, was in Lynchburg. Cassandra Morton, age 23, vanished. She was last spotted on Park Avenue, which is located in Lynchburg's downtown. The only information the police could find when her family reported her missing was that she got into a black car with someone. Her remains were discovered 6 weeks later. Her body had been strewn with rocks by a passerby who had just passed by the last spot she had been seen. 20-year-old Morgan Dana Harrington was last seen in Lynchburg 7 days after Cassandra Morton vanished. Morgan Dana Harrington, age 20, vanished in Charlottesville, a nearby city 70 miles distant. On that terrible day, October 17, 2009, she was a student at a technological university. She and her pals went to see Metallica perform. When his opening band was on stage, she informed her friends that she would use the bathroom and then come back. Her pals were concerned because she had been gone for a while. When they called her at 8:48 p.m., she replied that she was outside the arena but was prohibited from entering due to the no re-entry rule. She also indicated that she was going home, but nobody seemed to think about how she would get there for some reason. No one can figure out why she left the arena since she never came back. She said that she needed to use the restroom, yet there are facilities inside the arena. It's still unclear how she got outside, or either it is genuinely unknown, or it is kept quiet for image purposes. Her wallet and phone were discovered the following day in a parking area close to the arena. 2 months later, on January 26, 2010, witnesses were located who had seen a young lady who resembled Morgan Harrington voting at a nearby bridge. A farmer in Albemarle County, 10 miles from the arena where the performance was held, found her bones. Later, the daughter's parents admitted that she was coerced into having a sexual encounter in the final moments of her life. Samantha Ann Clark, 19, vanished in Orange on September 13, 2010, when she was 19 years old. When Samantha left the house at 1:30 a.m. on the day of the incident, her mother Barbara was working the night shift. Her younger brother, who was 12 years old, stayed at home with her. He called his mother to let her know Samantha had left. When Barbara got home the next morning, she found her daughter's pajamas lying on the bed, indicating the teenager had changed before leaving. Admonish Samantha about threats he'd heard from friends. At the time, Taylor was not connected to Samantha Clark's disappearance in any way that the police could discover. The investigation came to a halt since the phone calls were insufficient to support any charges. Age 19 for Saga Smith. Saga Smith, 19, vanished in the same Charlottesville 3 years after Morgan Harrington went missing there on November 20, 2012. She informed her roommate of her plans to that particular day as she was leaving her home. No one saw her again after that. The name of the guy she was meant to meet, Eric McFadden, was discovered by the police. He admitted during questioning that he was scheduled to meet with Sage, but that it never took place because he had other matters to take care of while the police were determining their next course of action. Alexis Murphy, 17, left her home in a truck close to Lynchburg, approximately a 30-minute drive away, while McFadden departed. She and her dad had made a deal that she had never broken the rule that she had to be home by midnight. The first time Alexis didn't arrive home by midnight was on August 3, 2013, and her grandmother instantly recognized a problem. The calls went to voicemail, so they were unable to speak with Alexis on the phone. Alexis was well-liked on social media and had many of friends. In an effort to locate Alexis, her parents contacted anyone who may have seen her on the day of her disappearance. This effort helped crack the case, attracted a lot of social media attention, and was featured in national news. People talked about the path Alex was scheduled to take via the notorious Route 29 from the shipment to Lynchburg. A movie theater in Charlottesville, Virginia, 40 miles from Alexis's house, and in the other direction from Lynchburg where she was headed, was where her white Nissan, which she usually traveled in, was discovered 3 days after she vanished. Although the area was cordoned off, forensic specialists could find no evidence of a crime in the car. One was made in the investigation. Surveillance footage from the Livingston Liberty gas station provided a breakthrough in the investigation. Detectives carefully reviewed the video which was captured on Saturday, the day Alexis left her house for Lynchburg. A slim-built man who held the door open for Alexis as he entered the building caught their attention in particular. The cashier who worked that day admitted to the police that there had been a brief exchange between the man, and the cashier also clearly remembers a Daffy Duck tattoo on the man's neck and the fact that he was driving a camouflage SUV after Alexis had paid and left for her car. The man exited the petrol station first, and Alexis followed shortly after, according to further analysis of the video. However, given that she was traveling in the direction of Lynchburg, this might have been a coincidence. Another video clip of the same person was obtained by the police. It was taken by a camera at an adult business in Charlottesville 1 hour before he at the petrol station appeared. He bought a movie from the selection offered at those shops, but the key finding was that Randy Taylor was indeed the man who had made the purchase. On the night of her abduction, Samantha Clark had received a call from the same person. The whereabouts of Randy Taylor was promptly discovered by the police. Only 1.5 miles separated him from the gas station and his mobile home. A search warrant might be obtained thanks to video evidence showing Alexis Murphy and Randy Taylor interacting on the day of her disappearance. Anything that might be connected to Alexis's disappearance was taken by FBI officers. Inside the trailer, they discovered 3 items that were particularly noteworthy: black hair, a severed artificial nail, and an earring stud. In close proximity to Randy Taylor's porch, within 20 meters, they discovered a broken phone that was also taken in for inspection. Within 2 days, the outcomes showed that it was Alexis Murphy's phone. Analyses proved Randy Taylor's connection to the missing girl. The earring, nail, and hair that were discovered in his home belonged to Alexis. Alexis Murphy was still missing 11 days after she vanished, despite the fact that Randy Taylor had been taken into custody. When Taylor arrived at the courthouse, he was accused of kidnapping. Taylor began to speak when he recognized that the police were looking for information that would implicate him in both the kidnapping and the death of the missing young woman. However, his statement was now what everyone knew. He said that day Alexis was in his trailer as expected, but she wasn't there by herself. She was there with a black man named Damian Bradley who had dreadlocks. The authorities found evidence that Alexis and Damian Bradley had indeed interacted online and met in person. They visited Taylor's trailer, according to Taylor, to sell plants they were growing, and they had a beer. Taylor utilized a physical struggle between Alexis and her friend at some time to explain why Alexis's DNA was found in the police investigated Damian Bradley's alibi and discovered that he was in another state at the time. It seemed as though Taylor was merely attempting to place the responsibility elsewhere. In the meantime, FBI officers went back to the trailer for another push, and it worked. They discovered Taylor's t-shirt, which was worn the day Alexis vanished, and was now wrinkled below the couch. Eyelashes and hair extensions that are frequently used as extensions were wrapped within. After inspection, it was discovered that the eyelashes and hair were. These pieces of evidence were sufficient to accuse Randy Taylor of both the kidnapping and the murder of Alexis Murphy on May 8, 2014. Randy Taylor was given 2 consecutive life sentences in July after being found guilty on all counts. Taylor said he would divulge the whereabouts of Alexis's body if his 2 life sentences were lowered to 20 years in prison in response to Alexis's family, eliminating any remaining concerns regarding his role in the young woman's abduction. Declared that they would not engage in negotiations and would never give Taylor the chance to escape and hurt someone else. Before Alexis Murphy's family had any prospect of being able to say goodbye to her, nearly 6 hard years had gone. Human remains were found on private land on December 3, 2020, and on February 5, 2021, it was determined that the bones belonged to Alexis Murphy. Although Taylor was said to have disclosed the location of the remains, no agreements were made with him, and his sentence is still in place. It's important to note that Samantha Clark's case, who aired in 2010 and was tied to Taylor, was reclassified on January 15, 2021, and is now being handled as a homicide investigation. On September 13, 2014, Hannah Graham, an 18-year-old student, vanished from Charlottesville. She was last seen in the early hours of the morning at a mall. Extensive searches involving more than 1,000 volunteers were carried out a week after Hannah vanished, but she was not discovered. She was seen on surveillance video and the police found it. Jesse Matthew, 32, was recognized as the individual seen with Hannah in the video recordings. His flat was searched, but he wasn't taken into custody. He was named as a suspect in Hannah Graham's kidnapping 4 days after that. When a warrant was issued for Matthew's arrest, he had already left. The following day, he was captured in Galveston, Texas. He was thought to be planning to flee the nation and travel to Mexico. On September 29, 2014, it was revealed that information gathered during Morgan Harrington's case linked Jesse Matthew to her death. Remains were discovered in Albemarle County on October 18, 2014, and they were eventually recognized as Hannah Graham's. Notably, these remains were located within 5 miles from the location of Morgan Harrington's remains. Matthew was charged with Hannah Graham's kidnapping on February 10, 2015, and on September 15 of that same year, he was also charged in connection with the Morgan Harrington case. However, it was later discovered that Hannah Graham and Morgan Harrington were after a month of study. A number of Jesse Matthew victims fled Liberty University in Lynchburg after one of the female students accused him of rape. He was able to avoid punishment nevertheless, since the complainant abandoned the allegations. After enrolling at Christopher Newport University in Newport News a few days later in January 2003, Matthew was once more the target of the same accusations. The victim again retracted the accusations after the university police looked into the issue. Matthew, from January 15 to October 15 of 2003, I attended Newport University. There were 2 missing ladies during this time. The fate of Without a Trace and their locations are still unknown. No evidence linking Matthew to their cases or the Cassandra Morton case was discovered, despite the police's investigation into any possible connections between their disappearances and Matthew. With this knowledge, there is only one question that can be asked. If the police had done their job properly, and both colleges where the complaints were made, at least 2 lives would have been saved if Matthew had persevered in the cases without worrying about damaging their image. In Charlottesville, Matthew started working as a cab driver in 2005. It's important to note that in the same year, a woman traveling home from work in Fairfax was attacked. In the Fairfax case, Jesse Matthew was charged with 3 counts of kidnapping, and the police were able to get a DNA sample from the culprit at the time, which has since been found to match Jesse Matthew's DNA. First off, he was found guilty on all 3 counts and given a life sentence for each one on October 2, 2015. In addition to the 3 life sentences he has previously been given as of this writing, in the instances of Alicia Reynolds and Morgan Harrington, he was sentenced to 4 further life terms for each of those crimes on March 2, 2016. The positions of Sage Smith, Carolyn McDaniel, Samantha Ann Clark, Laura Winans, and Julianne Williams are still available. It is challenging when you look at these faces. It is difficult to think what additional horrors they may have kept buried in their closets, and it is much more difficult to comprehend the suffering they have caused the victims' loved ones. Share your opinion on this story in the comments, and don't forget to like it. Thanks for watching. Yeah.